Imagine this. You are in the living room watching the medical procedural drama House MD. The titular doctor, House, is characterized as standoffish and antisocial and rude. His interactions with others reflect this, so in the first 10 minutes you get a sturdy concept of his attitude and what he'd be like to work with. A little frustrating, probably. In one scene, a patient is waiting with him in the doctor's office. House is playing something on his Game Boy Advance. You recognize this device, maybe it's something you own and enjoy using, but no one else in the room feels the same. The game shown briefly on screen, Metroid Zero Mission, means something to you, but nothing to the show's intended audience. This prop is only used to indicate to viewers that it's a neglectful, distractive activity suiting his stone-cold personality. The patient asks, "What are you doing?" The doctor replies, "Level 4. Your eyes widen, your muscles tense a little, you stifle a laugh. Level 4? Level 4? Wait, the sounds coming out of the Game Boy aren't even Metroid sounds. They're not even Game Boy sounds. The game has been artificially rendered to seem less substantial or interesting than the real product, but this is definitely a Game Boy, and it's definitely Metroid. House is big business, it's prestige TV, so this blatant misrepresentation of a popular game baffles you, but much to your frustration, this is a very common occurrence. You've seen this kind of scene before, and you will see it again. For a few weeks I've been asking around about examples of this phenomenon. Video games are an ultra-popular form of modern entertainment, and they're significantly adaptable. They're easy to fit in casual fictional scenarios, so in turn it's easy to track examples of them showing up in film and TV. What I wasn't prepared for is the wide array of methods used to depict games, the range of accuracy and the difference between non-specific abstractions of games versus corporately approved product placement. Like, in animation, for example, games will usually just be vague interpretations. Sometimes they're generic, based on just the idea of a video game, or they're explicitly referential, like how Ocarina of Time appears in this episode of the Powerpuff Girls because the staff were addicted to it. There's countless Simpsons parodies and episodes of cartoons nebulously about video games, and by nature they don't feature real props or product placement. This said, superimposed game footage can still pop up in animation, like Kid Icarus shows up in this one scene in the Super Mario Bros. Movie, but that's Nintendo's own production anyway, so its appearance isn't so shocking. What is shocking is when someone's random gameplay footage pops up unauthorized and uncredited, which is exactly what happened with this episode of Family Guy. There's just actual game footage of Double Dribble, directly taken from the YouTube channel Switched, and I mean, that's really scummy. There are numerous examples of gameplay being totally out of place but in more official capacities, like how Monster Hunter shows up in the Wotakoi anime. That's real, genuine game footage on a less than real Nintendo Switch, recorded for the show. What's Fox's excuse? Outside game footage being transplanted into these scenes, animated renditions of games tend to be loose and non-distinct. On the other hand, they can be artistically accurate. Animators are naturally going to have a better understanding of how games look and move, so there's not much that can go wrong even if they're recreating game graphics from the ground up. But, I mean, Gundam 0080 from 1989 has this sci-fi light gun game that doesn't really bother replicating game graphics but features other traits like a title screen and points popping up. It's far more abstract, since it's kind of questioning what games would even look like in a space-age setting, and yet, audio-wise, it literally samples Mario 3. Jumping ahead to the modern day though, the Evangelion Rebuild movies have a game depiction so baffling and bewildering and confusing to me that it kind of inspired me to make this video months ahead of time. The franchise is no stranger to game product placement, with the original series showing a Sega Saturn and its games in a couple scenes, but it's a little different in the rebuilds. Like, get this, in one scene, Asuka is holding a Wonder Swan. You know, that thing I made a video about, right? But look, that's the damn Pippin logo. So what is this supposed to be? In the final movie, 3.0 plus 1.0, Asuka is again seen with a Wonderswan, and we even see this freakish horizontal version of its killer app Gunpei, the best game ever made. But there are a few changes. For whatever reason, the Pippin logo is missing half its letters, and on the front it's branded as a Power Player Arcadia. This thing went from product placement to abstraction between movies. This is the legacy of the Wonderswan, I guess. Incidentally, the Wonderswan does show up as a prop in Kamen Rider X8, the series iteration about a doctor who's also a gamer, where it's shown the protagonist was given one as a kid. That show, based on the first episode at least, I didn't watch very much of it, is pretty good with depicting the energy of games, but aesthetically it gave me the vibe of, like, a school backpack or a birthday card or something nebulously themed around game culture. So that sort of thing is not really what I'm going for. I'm seeking out actual props or real game footage found within the context of a fictional movie or TV show. Plenty of stuff out there is about games, especially now with the sudden rise in adaptations of game brands, so instead I'm focusing on instances where they just happen to show up, or they're part of a diegetic world. It's very common for a game to just exist in a scene, and often it's a real official piece of hardware. The earliest example provided to me was a scene in Dawn of the Dead from 1978 in which characters just play arcade games with a mixture of old-fashioned mechanical cabinets and video cabinets from Atari and Taito and such. These had been popular for some time before this, but this scene comes after video arcade games were already proven mainstream, something that could just appear casually in a movie. Not like games have ever needed validation by appearing in movies, rather their appearance here is proof of their status in culture. A few years later we also got Tron, and though it's almost entirely a fantasy movie about a made-up arcade game, the main guy is an arcade owner and owns an arcade with games that aren't fictional. It's safe to assume that Tron represents many people's idea of video games at the time as some magical, whimsical technology. The beginning of National Lampoon's Vacation gives us a glimpse into the status of games in 1983, now found in the home as something the kids play with. Although the console being used here, the Bally Professional Arcade, is very real, the gag revolving around it is fabricated. Papa Griswold over here is trying to show the kids their vacation with a computer simulation, something pretty high-tech for the time this came out in, while the kids interfere with the simulation by controlling a false Pac-Man. Pac-Man being this simple shape, replicable with even the simplest graphics, is already visual shorthand for video games in general. The Atari VCS probably showed up in a bunch of places, being the dominant American console for a bit there, but it's maybe not so common to see people using one in movies. All I got is this gag from Airplane, which released a little earlier on, where the control station guys play Atari basketball. This and Vacation certainly paint a picture of games being this aloof activity, which is a perspective that might have changed over time. The Princess Bride, a movie I was delighted to watch for this video, it's really good, and I'm mad I never saw it sooner, begins with a shot of this kid playing a random baseball game on his Commodore 64. Although the computer released in 1982, it was still going strong around 1987 when Princess Bride released, so this isn't too out of place. So you're already here. You probably know that Nintendo was around by 87, right? The NES totally released in 1985. It says so right here. This is all the information you need. For sure, legitimately, really, positively, definitely. The rise of the NES and its eventual dominance of the US console market was not as clear-cut as the 1985 release date would lead you to think. The console was launched sporadically across states in 1986 and only really caught up by the end of that year. As a result, this supposed giant wasn't really present in any movies until the very end of the decade. That is, not in any American movies. By 1987, the Famicom was a household name in Japan, expanding monumentally after its launch in 1983. It certainly wasn't the first console there, but it was a certified brand, one that could appear in a movie and be recognizable as a part of culture, and so it did. The earliest appearance that I could find of the Famicom in film is from Maruso no Onna. There's a scene where the titular Onna is performing an inspection on this tax fraudster's house, and once she enters the living room, she goddamn magnetizes to the TV where the fraudster's kid is playing Mario 2. After performing a cool trick, he hands her the third-party controller and gives her tips, but her on-screen gameplay shows that she already has experience with the game, and I mean, this is just a really cute part of the movie. Maru-san no Ona's 1989 sequel coincided with a tie-in Famicom game, bringing this whole thing full circle, but the movie's director, Juzo Itami, was also involved in Sweet Home, and this is my 5th excuse this week to tell someone about Sweet Home. Please refer to the chart. If the Famicom popped up anywhere before this, I wouldn't know. Please let me know if you've seen any appearances from before this one, but the NES certainly showed up afterwards. Infamously, 1989's The Wizard, not to be confused with The Wiz starring Michael Jackson, is all about Nintendo products and stands as a monument of the company's market saturation. It's considered one giant ad for the NES, shamelessly throwing out shot after shot of the console and its games, throwing in what's essentially a big pre-release commercial for Super Mario Bros. 3 at the big climactic video game championship tournament. The Nintendo Entertainment System was dominating the game market, and so this movie was a result of Nintendo's hubris. But how much of this is actually true? Upon watching it, I found that it's just sort of a sweet family movie about a neurodivergent boy who happens to like video games. The narrative stands on its own without the placement of Nintendo's specific products, but games are key to the story. They're the kind of thing a quiet kid coping with a particularly traumatic experience would be into, a fresh hobby which his family learns to cheer him on for by the end. A lot of the Nintendo product placement feels quite incidental. The games primarily show up in the form of PlayChoice 10 arcade cabinets, which easily could have been other non-Nintendo cabinets. All the NES consoles that pop up feel more like generic props, and I don't think the word Nintendo is uttered once in the whole movie. You have the infamous Power Glove scene, sure, but despite the peripheral being closely associated with Nintendo, it's actually a Mattel product. And, of course, there's the dazzling Mario 3 sequence. It's certainly weird. The Wizard released in the US the year before Mario 3 did, and it shines a pretty heavy spotlight on the game unlike any others. In fact, even though plenty of other games show up and get name-dropped, Mario 3 is the only game cited in the credits. It's the star of the show. Before it appears, a big stink is made of it being a new game, and once the actual match begins, the kids seemingly manage to make a lot of unrealistic moves, finding a hidden warp whistle and such. The scene is pretty poorly put together too. The announcer says stuff that doesn't quite match up with the footage, and the whole thing is impossible to really follow. Knowing that the game wasn't out yet, the movie even saying that it's new, this all seems preposterous on the surface. Yes, Super Mario Bros. 3 was not yet out on the Nintendo Entertainment System specifically, but it could be played in the States several months before this movie released. Believe it or not, Nintendo put it out on PlayChoice 10 first. PlayChoice is possibly also the reason why an arcade version of Wild Gunman appears in Back to the Future Part 2. This specific version, the branding and how it's displayed and everything, is totally made up, but the game was technically in arcades, just in a different, less flashy form, and probably not in the year 2015. Nintendo's brand in the States had risen hugely by 1989, leading to other scattered movie appearances from around this time, even in small projects like this weird student film, Ghostbuster Stew. The presence of the NES, even if it's not necessarily accurate, is generally pretty positive, or, you know, endorsed by Nintendo itself. Critical response to video games did not yet take place within movies, even subtly like House MD's later Metroid addiction, despite tangible cultural impact. So anyway, let's talk about a movie that has a critical response to video games. As Nintendo were publishing Dragon Quest in the States for the first time, Japanese audiences had just faced the explosive launch of the third game in the series. It was a cultural phenomenon that turned Dragon Quest into a household name, and with it came concerns about how it occupied the lives of its young fans. Because, yeah, on a national scale it was all-encompassing, it was a perfect storm. The Famicom had been around for ages, but developers were continuously expanding its capabilities. The first two Dragon Quest games got the recognition necessary to make 3 a giant event, one which kept tons of kids indoors. No Life King is a movie about this social phenomenon. No Life King is a movie about fearing for a new generation. No Life King is a movie about touching grass. This came out only a year after Dragon Quest III launched, the very same year as The Wizard in fact, which kind of just feels impossible. No Life King feels like it came out in the late 90s, when fearful media about computers and the internet was commonplace, but here the fear is only over a role-playing game. And computers too, but mainly the role-playing game. It's also kind of a creepypasta movie. These kids share rumors that certain copies of Life King 4, the Dragon Quest stand-in, are haunted and whoever plays them will die. This isn't a horror movie, though. Nothing spooky actually happens, rather it's about how a child would interface with these rumors, with this overall game culture, and ultimately overcome it. When I say it's a movie about touching grass, I genuinely mean the answer it provides to the concerns about game addiction is that kids should learn to appreciate the world around them over the one in their TV. It's commentary that could easily pass today. For its time, it's highly informed on the culture of games and depicts them realistically and with intent. Like, there's a scene where this group of kids just huddles in front of a game and the atmosphere totally lacks any sense of joy. It asks whether kids even have fun playing video games all day. Of course, Life King 4 is fake, but its visuals are remarkable for a game that doesn't exist. It looks exactly like something you would see on the PC Engine or Mega Drive. I love how the nature of the game is never consistent, like it's an RPG but it's also a Space Harrier type shooter, and the console it's actually running on is kept vague. No Life King not only gets the depiction right, but it responds to the language of it. Like, what is this abomination on the screen? It sits with the original Mother as explicitly post-Dragon Quest media, but takes a way more inquisitive approach. The soundtrack was even composed by Sayako Suzuki, who at the time was married to the Mother composer Keiichi Suzuki, so there's some quite direct companionship between the two. Wait, where was I? Video games by this point were a firmly understood form of entertainment, one that the mediums of film and TV could react to in their own ways. These mediums could also be used lucratively to advertise, and a lot of the time when a game appears in a movie it's to do just that. So let's go over a bunch of times where that happened. RoboCop 2 has a bunch of Data East arcade games in one scene. In Terminator 2, there's a bunch of different arcade games, including Sega's Afterburner. Airheads has a Game Gear that this secretary plays. Hackers has a fake CGI parallel version of Wipeout to coincide with the release of the PlayStation, but it must have been made before they had finalized gameplay, because it's entirely just fake. A copy of Earthbound shows up in the background of an episode of Frasier. One of the best movies ever made, Welcome Back Mr. McDonald, has an old sound guy playing a Game Boy. Gamera 3 has a Sega Dreamcast and it's a key element of the story. In the Charlie's Angels reboot, these two kids play Final Fantasy VIII together. Hey, what the fuck? So, inexplicably, as the frequency of game appearances increased throughout the 1990s, the literacy around them decreased. Instances of games appearing were now scrappier and easier to make fun of. The Wizard had its own inaccuracies for sure, but games were at least somewhat new at that point. 10 years later, Tony Soprano from prestigious television network home box office drama The Sopranos is holding a Nintendo 64 controller with one hand before he wins a Mario Kart race and then walks away while his son is still playing, and there's still a second racer on the screen. It's at this point where the kind of environment allowing for that infamous House MD clip was now the default. Games were big, huge products enjoyed everywhere, but So many of these big budget productions manage to simply not care whether the on-screen depiction of a game makes any sense. I mean, I'm not a brand cop, I don't really care if Tony here is holding the controller wrong. In fact, I like it, I think it's funny, but there's always reasons for these kinds of production mishaps. A lot goes into filming a good scene, and since actors won't necessarily know how to play games, let alone perform them on camera, the footage used in instances like these will be pre-recorded. That's how Mario Kart is still going without a second player, it's just playing on its own. It's an easy way to relieve the pressure of having an actor look like they're playing the game. Take this episode of Drake and Josh, for example. Josh is addicted to games, but the gameplay is never ever shown aside from a hallucinated approximation. The episode itself is also pretty infamous for its shameless promotion of the Game Sphere, the weird mid-generation console from 2004 that you might not have even heard of. I personally hadn't heard of it before researching for this video, and as much as I'd want to go into what this thing even is, the retro game market is nuts right now and I can't afford one. Instead, I asked friend of the show and resident Drake and Josh fan Zarithia to look at one for me because she actually already has one for some reason.
So this is my own childhood game sphere that Riley wanted me to show y'all. It's not doing too hot. But yeah, no, this thing was an overpriced piece of crap that I convinced my parents to buy because of the Drake and Josh integration. Because, I mean, I had to have it. It's spherical. Spherical! Yeah, I don't know if you can tell by the peeling logo here, but this thing is kind of a piece of crap. They didn't really take much care when they manufactured it, and... Oh. Well, that's not good. Yeah, it broke many years ago, so there's no more video output, but I think I can get the audio working here. Plug it into the butt. Do I have, like, blue tack? Just plug that in.
Welcome to GameSphere. Prepare for the
Yeah, it's super obnoxious, you know? I don't know why they decided to make it like that. It's every single time this thing boots, it sounds like that. So yeah, that's the GameSphere. Wish I got a GameCube instead. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, sorry. One of the most known traits of this sort of interpretive outsider understanding of games is the use of generic stock video game sounds. The beeps and the boops. House MD did it, and this Drake and Josh episode does it too. At the start of the episode, Josh is using a PS2 controller to play something that sounds distinctly not PS2-ish.
Yes! Yes!
The reason for this is that a commonly used sound library features an arcade video game series of samples. The library itself is from the early 80s, so these miscellaneous video game sounds are actually all from Atari games. The most common one is this Donkey Kong sample, and so if you hear this, you'll probably recognize it from one of the dozens of cartoons it's popped up in. It's a specific game, repurposed as a generic sound source. Cool. For a refreshingly specific use case of a game, we need only check out Reign Over Me, the abundantly post-9/11 Adam Sandler drama movie. Yes, I really just said that out of my mouth. That is a thing that I just said. Sandler's character has PTSD and passes his time by doing things deemed unserious and wasteful by the narrative. He wanted to be a dentist, and now he stays up all night going to clubs and playing music and stuff. What a waste. We need to get him back on track. Being a Sony production, it naturally features product placement in the form of the late PS2 game Shadow of the Colossus. Though this movie has its issues, the way it uses this game is not as unhealthy or critical as I was expecting. Out of all the evidently wasteful activities Sandler partakes in to cope with his trauma, he plays Shadow of the Colossus with the Don Cheadle rich boy protagonist as a bonding activity, a way the two can spend time together. Even by the end of the movie, when Sandler is evidently fixed, and the lighting is warm, and the movie can conclude on a light note, he is still playing the game. Sony has a knack for this sort of not-so-subtle advertisement of their extended ecosystem of products within their movies. Only a couple years after this, the amorphous substance Paul Blart Mall Cop did it too in a far weaker way. In one scene, the titular Paul Cop enters an arcade, tries a fictitious treadmill game so the movie can make a joke about his weight, gives up, and goes over to a non-existent arcade version of Rock Band so a licensed song can start playing. For some reason, this arcade has ads for multiple EA and Sony games, and even features a PS3 kiosk, hitting the viewer over the head with the suggestion that you should buy a PS3. It has Ratchet and Clank on it. Don't you like SingStar? Isn't SingStar cool? A pretty different, widely known example of Sony's cross-promotional tendencies is the few instances in Breaking Bad where Jesse Pinkman plays an Xbox 360. Infamously, he plays worst game ever made, Sonic 06, as well as a light gun version of the mobile version of the id Software game Rage, which did not exist in the year this episode is set in, thus causing a time paradox. Though this isn't an instance of Sony's own product placement, later in Season 5 it's revealed that Jesse also owns a PS3 because he's got a time-traveling copy of Little Big Planet 2, a game from 2011. Sony's advertising is so tenacious it breaks the continuity of a series acclaimed for its intricacy. And, I mean, if you saw my previous video when I covered PlayStation Home, you'd know that Sony are the type to advertise their own console on their own console, connect people together with ads. It's creepy. By this point, we've reached the 2010s, which is oddly the beginning of a new era for video games in popular culture. Enough time had passed between that initial late 80s branding boom and here that people began to reminisce a lot on the good old days. We already saw it in video games, the likes of Nintendo's Virtual Console and new flimsy titles like Mega Man 9 taking 30-somethings back to when they were 10-somethings. Teens? Something like that. In the wider cultural sphere, we were seeing the early hints of a mainstream 80s resurgence that sought to profit from the loose romanticized memory of the decade and its culture. This sort of thing has always been common, I guess, particularly 50s throwbacks, but the 1980s had a particular cultural identity that could be exploited in new ways. This includes the rise of video games in the mainstream, games which could now be safely revisited and profitably depicted in ways Wizard-era Nintendo couldn't have dreamt of. I'm sorry, but now is the part where I talk to you about the Adam Sandler movie Pixels. My whole scientific expedition into how movies and TV shows depict games started because my best friend Octo was telling me about how she watched the Adam Sandler movie Pixels for the first time not too long ago. She found it befuddling that the movie on its surface is all about games, yet doesn't understand how they function on a basic level. Sandler plays an ex-champion of video games, second only to a cheater. He seems to fondly remember the glimmering years of arcades shown in this nauseously upbeat opening scene. But in the modern day, which is coincidentally much duller, he's a repair guy who can't talk to this woman but decides to bond with her kid anyway. Sorry, what's a good antonym for bond? You know how when you pour oil into water and it doesn't mix, it's kind of like that. Sandler's character firmly believes that games just don't have patterns anymore.
There's no rhyme or reason to this game. Where are the patterns? He just attacks out of left field.
It's not just a throwaway line or something, it's a central part of this movie's conflict with the arcade copying aliens, that only he can read their patterns successfully enough to beat them. Surely someone so analytical and thorough would play new games and recognize their intrinsic patterns, because very few games actually feature the nonsensical onslaught he describes. It would be very hard to program something with no patterns. Instead, he's an embittered middle-aged fart who only knows games as the thing he played as a child, refusing to engage with them beyond those faint memories. He's also friends with the President of the United States. The Adam Sandler movie Pixels sizes video games up to be a global threat to the US one must beat instead of the fun pastime it actually is. It is brutish and mean-spirited. It mocks people who enjoy them, belittles the creative force behind them, and suggests that games were only ever for dudes and men, while women are just trophies to be won. Congrats, boys! You saved the world and the United States. Here's a ceremony. Here's a medal from President Blart. Here's the woman you were promised. Is that blood coming from my mouth? In everything we've looked at so far, nearly all of it presents games as an activity for boys and guys, whether or not games are central to the story. It's sad to me, because as early as 1980, Rebecca Heinemann was out here winning the first American video game tournament, becoming a champ for the Atari version of Space Invaders. She has accomplished significantly more than Adam Sandler's fictional gaming hero ever did, being a storied programmer, and she didn't need to be best buds with Paul Blart to do it. To Heinemann, video games are very real. They were and are a core part of her career. The Adam Sandler movie Pixels treats them like a fad that never matured and portrays them like an invasive presence laying waste to the minds of our precious baby children. Kind of like Wart from Mario 2. In contrast, Reign Over Me depicts the seemingly patternless shadow of the Colossus as the glue holding a broken man's life together. The presence of video games means something different from one production to the next. To you, they hold a different significance than they do for me. On the Japanese TV show Game Center CX, this guy, Arino, is given a classic game every episode and instructed to clear it by any means necessary. Each episode runs for about an hour, and so full playthroughs will be trimmed down to fit. Viewers only watch the game being played, but Arino sits at a desk for hours at a time, in control of the game, essentially putting on a show through it. To both Arino and the viewers at home, the game's context is completely warped, manipulated into something new. A game that's usually a long-lasting pastime, one that you might even have specific personal memories of, becomes the subject of a TV broadcast. But I won't talk too much about the TV show itself, rather I want to tell you about the movie. Released in Japan just a year before the Adam Sandler movie Pixels, Game Center CX the movie similarly lingers on the age of classic 1980s video games. The majority of what's featured on the show is crushingly difficult Famicom games, so the movie is set during that pocket of time when Nintendo was making waves. It's a period piece about a kid, Daisuke, who plays Famicom games all the time. It's his primary hobby, and he falls in love with a girl who also plays them. To impress her, he sets out to lend her his copy of Mighty Bomb Jack, but along the way it ends up in the hands of this bully who hands it over to the rough, scary biker kids. It's small in scope, and cute, and childish, and low stakes. Mighty Bomb Jack becomes the center of the story, but it's generally pretty replaceable. It could be any game. Retrieving the cartridge is all that matters. Except, the other half of this movie is the Mighty Bomb Jack episode of Game Center CX. The fictional period piece slice-of-life romance plotline is only introduced after we see the beginning of Arino's gameplay. The story is spliced between segments of Arino playing and failing at the game, providing an alternative, almost opposite perspective. What this means is that there are two contrasting contexts within which we see Mighty Bomb Jack. In one instance, it's the arduous challenge Arino must overcome, a difficult journey spread across multiple days, and a live stage event. Mighty Bomb Jack is an unforgivingly difficult game, and this isn't something that can be properly communicated unless we watch it ourselves. These portions give weight to the game in the other half of the movie, and we grow familiar with it even if we've never played it before. Once Daisuke takes back the game and gets chased down by the biker kids, the true nature of the movie unfolds. These two threads, as much as they clash, manage to converge in a very abrupt, disorientating way. Here he is, in the crowd, with us, watching as some guy from the future plays this game that means something specific to him. Daisuke, a fictional manifestation of long-gone memories, literally stands out within the crowd, disconnected and out of place. He's called up on stage to help play the game, does so, gets hit, and then leaves accordingly. That's it. That was his moment. This sequence encapsulates so much of the spirit of the show, but it also captures that feeling I keep returning to. The differing perspective on a game as inconsequential as Mighty Bomb Jack, and the way personal circumstances can affect our attachment to a work like it. In a lot of ways, Daisuke is meant to be the stand-in for the audience. His attachment to the game brings personal meaning, even if he isn't very good at playing it. It's honest, and it presents games and the culture of the past in a very delicate, humble way. Sandler, too, represents the audience in his movie, but he embodies the unhealthy masculine ideals of a pro-gamer who doesn't even enjoy the hobby he claims to be good at. A big stink is made of just winning, and not how we get to that point. One haunting element I noticed throughout the Adam Sandler movie Pixels, as well as Paul Blart for that matter, is the weird emphasis on high school. It really feels like these movies were produced by people who simply cannot get over their school years and vent those frustrations in their comedy movies. Although they are comedies, the protagonists are always noble or they save the day or something. There's some sort of bully stand-in and a love interest made of cardboard who the protagonist wins by the end. Meanwhile, the bullies in Game Center CX are just nonchalant and silly. Daisuke doesn't even get the girl he's crushing on. Her boyfriend shows up and is like, "Oh wait, this isn't Bomberman, lol, let's go babe," and he's left in the dust, but it's no big deal. He's able to move on just fine. Game Center CX overall has a pretty good grasp on game culture, and it's something I'd love to go more in depth about some other day. Early in the show, when each episode focused on developer interviews, Arino would ask developers what games meant to them. Though the structure of the show had changed significantly between then and the movie, this inquisitive nature remains at its core. There's no one way to enjoy games, rather there's a plethora, an abundance, a plenitude of different ways you can look at these things. It's something like Metroid Zero Mission popping up on screen for a brief moment in House MD is a test of your own attachment to games, I suppose. To House's target audience, it gets a quick point across, but to viewers who know Metroid, who maybe played it for hours and can tell exactly what is happening on screen, it's unnatural and reflects how the production crew in particular views games. It's about as dizzying as the moment where Daisuke is transplanted into the Game Center CX audience. It's like looking through someone else's eyes. You're watching this video. I've spent hours putting it together. I've even recorded it more than once. You won't ever feel the same exact way I do about it. Isn't that freaky?
Here's Tony, notable GameSphere enthusiast. So enthusiastic. Oh, so excited.